Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're going to take the things we've just learned in the last video and we're going to actually apply it and build something. And we're going to build this fire hydrant. So the reason I chose this object is because although it seems like a pretty simple and familiar thing, if you look at it closely it's actually very complex, especially with the little details like this that we have to build right into that surface. It's also kind of challenging to build something that has to be completely round in one direction, like this main piece here is sort of cylindrical. Well, it is cylindrical. It's very round, and so we have to try and preserve that as we model in details like this. And we'll probably have to use all of the techniques that we looked at last time to accomplish this, and a lot of the ones we've already gone over. So this is kind of bringing it together, and this model is going to be kind of a segue model in this class because after this we're going to move on to more advanced things. But if you can model this successfully and feel comfortable doing it, then you're going to be in good shape to move forward. So follow along with me or model it afterwards, and don't give up until you've got something that looks really nice and that you feel comfortable building, that you could build it again without any trouble. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm just going to leave this open and bring it up now and again to reference it loosely. I'm not going to model it exactly as you see it. I'll try and get close to it. But there's the nature of this image being perspective as it is. That is to say, we're not looking at it straight on or directly top down or anything like that. So it's a perspective image. And just because that, it's going to mean that we can't model it exactly perfectly. But that's okay because it's not too important for this exercise. Really, we just want to capture the main shape and the general feeling of it, and we want to try and hit all the little details that we see here, because those are going to be some of the most challenging parts. So I'm going to start out with a cylinder, and what I'm going to do as I build this is I'm just going to look at it from the bottom up. So I'm going to start with the base, these little details right down here, and then we'll make this lip, and we'll just move on up. So the first thing I want to think about is how many spans do I want? And actually I think this is probably good. It starts out with 16 here, and that's probably going to be okay. We're going to be able to save ourselves a little bit of work because, as you can see, this is a symmetrical object. So from left to right it's symmetrical. From front to back it may not be symmetrical, but we can add this detail in later. And then there's a lot of other symmetrical aspects of this, like this piece is symmetrical from top to bottom in itself. And then we can also duplicate this piece once we build it and bring it up here. So yeah, I think 16 spans are going to work out okay for us. So first thing I want to try and do is capture in those little ridges down there. You can see, if you look at it closely, we've got, it looks like, yeah, there's a little bolt down there. So it goes up, and then we've got this little lip here, and then it goes up again. So let's do that real quick. So I'm going to insert some edge loops. I'll grab this edge, convert it to a face path, and extrude it out. Okay, so that's a good start. And I may worry about adding in all the extra edges here at the end. So I'll just model it low res first. Okay, and then we have this piece here. So let's grab all these faces. I'm going to use the paint selection tool. And let's extrude, and I'm just going to scale this whole thing out. Move it up just a little bit. And just kind of eyeball like how far this comes out. Maybe a little bit more. I'll bring this up. So this is a symmetrical piece. So how about we do this? Let's model it up to there, and I'll add a couple of ridges here. So let's see, we've got a little tiny ridge right here. I'll do the same thing. Let's bring that out ever so slightly. And then up here as well. So here's a glitch in Maya. They come up every now and again, but for some reason, even though I'm in even though I'm in object mode, even if I deselect this object, I'm left over with these faces here. So that's just an error that can happen sometimes. And what I typically do to resolve this is I just go to face mode, or whichever component it happens to be, select everything, and then deselect everything. And that almost always fixes it. Okay, so convert that to a face path and extrude it out. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is select these faces on the inside, the paint selection tool. Now I'm going to grow the selection using the shift period button, shift period hotkey combination, and just delete that so it becomes open. And now what I'm going to do is make another face path selection. I'm going to start growing it out, the shift period button hotkey, until I get to about there. And then I'm going to run this tool, which is the polysurgeon tool I've got, just so I can break that off. Okay, and now I'm going to duplicate this, flip it over, and attach it. So Control D, rotate it by 180, that'll flip it over, then bring it up. And now we just need to attach this again. The fastest way to do this, let me turn wireframe on. The fastest way to do this is to hold down the D key and then middle mouse button over a vertice. What that does is it changes the pivot point of the object to that point that you selected. So I could change it to this one or any of these points. I'm holding down the D key again. There we go. And now I'm going to go to translate mode, and I'm going to hold down the V button, which, if you remember, is snap to point. So I hold it down, and my manipulator turns into this little circle, and now I can middle mouse button to the nearest vertice. And the reason I did it that way was so that I know for a fact that this is touching now. So there's no gap in between there whatsoever. Now I can just grab both of those and combine them. And let's see where we're at. So this is kind of rounded instead of flat. So I'm just going to add a little bit of roundness. And what I'm doing now, I've double-clicked this edge. I'm going to scale it out like that. And if you notice, what I'm kind of doing is just predicting what I'll be wanting to do when it smooths. So what I'm going to do ultimately, maybe I'll bring these back in a little bit. Constrain the scale with holding this down, that handle right there. What I'll do is when it comes time to add in all my edges, all my extra edges to hold down the corners I want to keep, I'll add them on this one, but I won't add them to this one, because I know that if the edges are spaced out, they're going to round out, which is exactly what I want to have happen. Okay. So there's that, and these bolts will be separate objects, so I'll add those in a little while. But let's continue on with the main model now. Just sort of eyeballing the distance here. Okay, so now we go up the main body of the fire hydrant. And I'm going to model it right up to this point to start. Okay, so now we have these interesting imprints. And what I'd like to do is make a guess as to how many there are around the circumference here. And my guess would be 8, because I can see 3. There's probably a fourth one hiding right here. And that probably makes up about half of the visible area here. It's probably not 6. I don't think it's an odd number. So I'm going to go with 8. So what I have to do here, this is good that I have 16 because that means that I've got an even number, or divisible number. So what we can do is we can select every other face using the Shift button. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to extrude each of these faces at the same time. So we're going to do Alt-E, and I'm going to actually grab the center scale point here and bring this in. So you see what's happening is that they're all scaling independently from each other. By the way, if you don't get a result like this when you do the extrude, there may be a setting that you need to set. Actually, it won't be relevant here, but make sure that this is set right here. So if you go to the Edit Mesh menu, you want to make sure that Keep Faces Together is turned on. I can even show you what that means real quick. Oops. So by default, if you have a selection of faces like this and you do an extrude, it's going to keep them together, which seems pretty obvious, but I'll show you the difference if we didn't do that. Well, actually, let me just keep it up for comparison. If we had this turned off, now when I do the extrusion, it's going to look the same from here, but if you look underneath, you can see that each of these faces are actually separate. So they each have a barrier of polygons between them. And this really becomes obvious when I smooth it down a little bit, or I should say average it. So you can see the difference here. So it actually doesn't matter in this case, but it's a good idea to keep this on because it'll make the most sense while you're working. Okay, so let's do another extrude, and we're just going to push in a little bit here. And maybe scale down. Something like that. So you can see that they're happening identically everywhere, which is really what we want right now. So let's take a quick look at this and see what it's going to look like when it smooths. So you can see that some of the stuff is holding up down here, but we really haven't held anything down yet. And we're getting something close to what we want, but not really exactly what we want. So we can work on that. First thing, let me just add a couple of lines here so that when we do preview it, it's going to make a little bit more sense. Okay. So the first thing I do is add an edge here and an edge here. Actually, let me leave the bottom one off so we can see the difference. And here's another glitch. So same glitch as before. Just got to select all the edges in this case. And then deselect. There we go. Okay. So you can see that with that extra line on top, it's holding this down a little bit more, and we're getting a bit of an indentation, which is what we want to ultimately have, instead of this completely roundness here. Because you can see that the shape here is kind of like a Long John donut, or like a pill, I guess. So we want to try and keep that. So let's get rid of that, and here's a quick way we can manipulate all of these at once. First, let's do this. Okay, so this is getting even better. Oops. Okay, so pretty good, but not quite there yet. For one thing, they're too skinny. That might be kind of a challenge to resolve, but let's see what we can do about it.